Hello. Welcome to episode 11 of The Creative Pause. I am Susan Padron, and I'm here with my co-host.
I'm Stacey Faye, and we're here with you today, like every other day, to offer you a time of respite and a time of connection with others when some of us are feeling pretty overwhelmed right now. So we're happy you're here today for sort of Friday happy hour. It's an appropriate topic, and we're excited to have Serena with us, and we'll introduce her in just a moment.
We always like to start each episode by checking in with ourselves, checking in with our guest, and those of you that are either watching live or watching the recording, by asking the question, how are you? How are you doing today? Because it's important, especially during these times. I feel like my mood has shifted into like a happier place. Being on the show usually does that for me. But as I was sharing with Stacey prior to us going live, I was definitely in a funk today. I think the week really caught up with me. With homeschooling my son and not having that alone time. And yesterday, Pennsylvania announced that their schools are going to be closed for the remainder of the academic school year. And while I'm based in New Jersey, I'm sure that New Jersey isn't too far behind that. So having that kind of like looming created a lot of anxiety and stress for me, for my son, with just all of the unknowns. So trying to balance that and just kind of work through my own feelings, I think was, putting me in that funk that I was in earlier today. But thankfully I had some downtime before we started with the show, and connecting with Stacey, and also chatting with Serena too before starting the show, I think really helped just bring me up a bit. But Stacey, how are you?
Yeah, so today's been an interesting day. I'm probably having a pretty good day overall because my husband's off. So he's like painting in the house. I hear him humming while he's painting, which is nice. And it's also good to get some projects done. And today at lunch, a really good thing that I didn't share earlier with Susan and Serena is I at every meal we say something we're thankful for, just before breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And our we're eating our meals with our son, our toddler son, Julian. And just in the past week, I've started actually asking him, because he's only a little over 2, so he understands everything, but he's, I hadn't yet engaged him to say, okay, Julian, what are you thankful for at this meal? So I've been doing that the past week, and every so often he'll chime in with something. Like a few days ago, it was water table. I was like, okay, like you get the concept, you understand what I'm asking. But then today he said, I'm thankful for lunch. He said the whole sentence. He said it in the present tense. He got the meal right, like we were at lunchtime, and he said, I am thankful for lunch. And I was like, holy smokes. It like practically knocked me off my chair. I was so excited. So that was a really good moment today. That was just like, you know what? I wouldn't even be here in this moment if I normally had him in daycare for the part-time hours I do, because he would eat lunch there. And it was a moment of just being very, very thankful for this time, this extra time with him. And then on the flip side, I'm very pregnant and going to give birth soon. And so having some anxieties about what that experience is going to be like and trying to ride that wave is interesting. So today's been a mix of like some really good and then some trying to kind of work through those emotions of around pregnancy and whatnot. So yeah. How about you, Serena?
Well, thanks for asking. I'm doing pretty well today. It's been an interesting week. We had our first week back at Drexel after an extended spring break. So we were converted onto online format for all of our classes. I teach some of the wine classes there, and it was really great to kind of bring the students back into some form of normalcy. And I think great to kind of just check in with where we were at the moment versus thinking about all of these things that are going to come, what awaits us in the future. That kind of brought me back to life is still going on, and all I control is what's happening today. So I'm trying to continue to focus on what is going on today in my life that I can control versus the things that are in the future that I don't have control of. All of those what ifs that can kind of sog us down. I'm really trying my best to kind of focus on what is today and what can I be thankful for. So all in all, I feel like today things are starting to round up and take shape and feel a little bit more comfortable as in this kind of temporary normal, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to that. I'm like trying to like bring that on to myself right now too, and just reminding myself to take the time to be present, be in that present moment, and to not be caught up with everything else. So I'm really glad that you shared that, and I'm gonna try to like take your advice, take my own advice, and
Easier said than done, right?
yeah, yeah, for sure. Something that I also wanted to do is for our listeners or our viewers to make sure that you're taking the time every day to check in with yourself, whether it's journaling or like saying it out loud, whatever feels right for you, take that opportunity and do it, because it's really crucial to check in with yourself, see how you're feeling throughout these times. All right. So the next portion of our show leads us to the wonderful quote that Serena shared with us. So I'm going to do a quick little screen share, get that going so that we can all see everything. There we go. Okay.
So yeah, we always start with a quote contributed from the guest, because it's something they find inspiring, and we think you would too. So this is from Robert Louis Stevenson, and it says, "The best things in life are nearest. Breath in your nostrils, light in your eyes, flowers at your feet, duties at your hand, the path of right just before you." So thank you so much for sharing that, Serena.
Thank you.
So without further ado, we're really excited to have Serena with the business What Am I Drinking here with us today. And it's an appropriate time because it's Friday, it's 5 o'clock, it's happy hour, sort of traditionally when things are our norm. But I think for a lot of people, it's also still the time of the week where you're like, oh, okay, take a deep breath and, maybe enjoy that glass of wine also. So Serena has a wine education studio called What Am I Drinking?, which is based in Bryn Mawr, Pennsylvania. And they offer a whole variety of different classes, everything from private events to corporate events and other ways that they educate people about wine. And that can range from, learn how to taste wine to identifying your wine style, mastering the swirl, which I still don't know how to do that myself. Exploring the difference between different grape varieties, pairing wines with your favorite foods. So you name it, Serena's doing all kinds of different classes and tastings to help people appreciate wine more and just to understand how to incorporate, if you're not a super wine connoisseur necessarily, how to kind of incorporate it into your life in a way that feels good, and you can choose wine that that's good for you, that, tastes good and matches what you're eating. So we're very excited to have Serena here today. She's going to talk about why now is a good time to be pouring that glass of wine, which all of us are making jokes about that, of course, but Serena has a lot of in-depth view about that. And she'll share some top tips for selecting wines on a budget, because we know everybody is on a more limited budget now. But that doesn't mean you have to necessarily compromise, the wine you're drinking. So anyway, Serena, we're so glad to have you, and you can take it away.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for the introduction, Stacey, and Susan as well. It's my honor to be here, and I want to thank you for inviting me to join you. I've been in awe of this program, and I think that it's really important that we do all take a little pause given everything that's going on in the world today. But I did want to take a little cue from you. I do get asked a lot about different aspects of wine, but I feel like right now is really the time to kind of nourish the mind and the soul and be a little bit more self-connected. So I wanted to look at wine for a few moments through that lens versus just all these details that we tend to get really caught up in. When we talk about wine, we tend to go straight for some sort of answer. So people come to me a lot about what's the best bottle of wine for this exact price, or what pairs with this exact dish, or, we even get rolled up in these kind of social standards of how do I behave, or what do I do in an environment where there is wine, and how do I swirl, and all of these different things. And those things are all great, and we will talk about that stuff in a moment. But as it turns out, in social environments, we do tend to get a little bit distracted by what is going on around us, and that we start to relay those emotions and feelings to the wine that we're enjoying. So many times we'll think that we love a wine so much more than we actually do because we're having just this really grand time, which is why many people have gone off on their honeymoon, or they tried this wine at their wedding or this great party, and then save the bottle later, and it turns out that they don't love it as much. So I hear that a lot. And of course, as much as we love to associate wine with social aspects, and that is very important, now that we are really limited to kind of the four walls of our homes, it's a really great opportunity to maybe pull that all back and consider our associations with wine and what that enjoyment means for us in our own selves. So the most important lesson that I can ever impart about wine is not actually any of those textbook details. I could ramble on and on about those, and I'm happy to do that at another time. But the most important lesson I can probably impart is that wine is a very personal journey. Tasting wine can really transform us in many, many ways. So if you think about how we taste wine, studies actually show that taking assessment of flavors and tastes, whether it be food or wine, it's one of the most engaging human activities that we have. So we're actually accessing, by creating this concept of taste or flavor, there's no actual structure around taste. It's really just based on these multiple stimulations of senses. So the most important when it comes to tasting wine is the one that we often forget, and that is the sense of smell. Our taste buds can pick up sweet and salty and bitter, but it does not pick up all of those tastes that we tend to talk about. That's really dependent upon our sense of smell. In fact, sense of smell is about 80% of our tasting experience. And that sense of smell is what triggers these memories, it elicits emotions. And as cliche as it is, we always talk about, stop and smell the roses. And I've heard that a lot lately. I'm stopping to smell the roses, but we don't literally do that. And I think it's a shame, because that is really where we start to store a lot of our deepest emotions and preferences about wine, our feelings. All of that is kind of stored away in these memories. And that is what we can tap with that sense of smell. So with that, first and foremost, despite everything, I just really wanted to put that on the table, that being in this kind of almost semi-solitude, I know we're kind of staying at home with spouses and children and maybe extended family members, but now is the perfect time, without any kind of social distractions other than maybe what's going on the television, to really kind of take that glass of wine as a moment to check in. Kind of think about yourself. It's an extremely personal experience. No one will experience that glass of wine the exact same way that you do, because they don't share the same senses you do. They don't share the same memories that you do. So all of those memories, feelings, and sensations, those are uniquely yours. So this is one of those things, kind of like a personal meditation that you can take by pouring a glass of wine and starting to tap into some of those things that we don't usually think about by way of sense of smell. And we then don't have all those social environment distractions. Does so-and-so like this wine, or is this a variety that is socially acceptable? None of those things matter. All that matters is how you are feeling about that glass. And as it evolves, how does that change? Just suddenly new smells arise that maybe tap new experiences for you. I love that there are a handful of sommeliers who even trying to associate wines with that one trip that they took, or the time that they walked through the apple orchard, or when they used to bake with their grandmother. And I think those are the most personal experiences that we can pull from wines, and certainly it has the ability to do that. Now, with all of that, I don't want to get too woo-woo on you, and I know that tips are still very, very important. So I do want to come with some tips today as well. So the first thing I want to talk about, we want to make sure that each sip is something that is going to provide us with the best experience. So the first thing I talk about in classes is often what I call the 5 S's, but really it's our ability to stop and pause and check in with each of those senses. So 5 S's, we talk about see, swirl, smell, sip, and savor. So those 5 S's are really just our stop point, our checkpoints with each of those feelings. How am I, what am I seeing? What am I smelling? How am I feeling? What memories or senses are triggering for me? So although your family might think you're a little bit silly, I do encourage you to kind of take a moment to kind of stop and like, gee, what does this look like? What color is this? What does it remind me of? And then when I go to smell, and I do encourage you swirl a little bit first. I know that that seems a little bit hoity-toity in some ways, but that swirl actually is the point where the alcohol starts to evaporate. And each glass of wine has several hundred aromatic compounds. So as that alcohol starts to evaporate, with it, it's taking those aromatic compounds and it's allowing us to take them in as smell. Now, when we get to that smell portion, so we've done our see and our sip. When we get to smell, this is where I really encourage people to kind of take their time. So we smell in a couple of ways. So the first one is right straight through the nose, and we all are familiar with this. And we get kind of this first glimpse of the wine. And I usually give it a few smells. The first one may be a little bit influenced by what's around you. Do you have a candle in the room? Is something else going on around you that may be influencing your smell? So take a few sniffs. And then the next one is going to actually occur once you put the wine in your mouth. So we've done a nice smell. We've started to create some associations with things in life. And now we're going to take a sip. Now, sip is not just about what does it taste like. There's a lot of things now going on. And the first thing that actually occurs is more smell. So we call this retronasal. So it's the process by which we are warming up the wine just a smidge in the mouth, and it's actually sending it back up through the nasal cavity where we're getting a even broader sense of smell. And you may have seen people like gurgle or slurp or slosh wine around, and you can try that if you want. To me, if you've done a nice swirl and you let it sit in your mouth for a moment, you're getting a lot of that experience, allowing it to go back up through retronasally. But then the next process that occurs, still in this sip stage, is that we are starting to sense what is involved with this wine. So all that sensory experience happening in the mouth. Wines have high levels of acidity, some even more so than others. What does that feel like? Does it make the wine feel very fresh? Does it even have a tartness to it? That acidity is what makes wine feel very lively, and it's also very volatile. So as that occurs in the mouth, you might notice your mouth watering or some tingling. And then sometimes we even have a drying sensation that occurs in red wines, and that is from impact from tannin, and that tannin comes from the grape skins, the seeds, maybe even the way that it was aged. All of that can cause an additional complexity to the texture of that wine. So now we're paying attention to what am I feeling. The next thing that occurs is as we swallow, I call this savor. we're paying attention to how long does that linger for us. And this is another moment to kind of take pause, counting out, how long do I still taste this wine? How does it feel going down? Is that acidity still kind of lingering in my mouth? So all of these things are now going into your experience with that wine. And this was just the first sip. So if you take several sips, maybe put it down, come back to it, and start to assess, how is this feeling to me? You might actually notice that you're experiencing wine in a very different way. So with that, I know that budgets are pretty tight right now. A lot of people are worried about what is to come, and wine is not that easy to access. So I know that there are a few people still getting wine out of Wegmans and other grocery stores today here in Pennsylvania. There are a handful of online retailers that are available, and many local wineries are still able to get wine to you either by way of shipments or deliveries. So that is certainly helpful. And I'm happy to chat with anyone offline about some recommendations for that. But in terms of what to buy, I usually have kind of a price range that I look for. As much as I wish that I could go out and tell you, here are my $5 favorites, I actually tend to encourage people to spend a few more dollars. Not a lot, but I look at kind of that 12 to 20 price point as being the sweet spot. And there's a few reasons for that. What we look at in the wine industry is kind of these varying levels of premium. So once you pass your $5 bottle of wine, you're no longer in bulk wine. And certainly bulk wine has a time and a place, and I can wax on about box wines just like the best of them. But for today, I think really taking in the greatest experience, I would focus on spending a few more dollars and maybe focusing on grapes that come from regions that are known for growing those grapes. So the other thing to note here is kind of avoid some of the overly famous regions. If you don't want to spend a ton, don't go looking for something from Napa. Napa is great, but you probably aren't going to find your best deals there. So if it's something like Cabernet Sauvignon, look at Chile. If you're looking for something similar to Cabernet Sauvignon, maybe you want a Malbec from Argentina. If you love Pinot Noir, instead of focusing on France or even sometimes Oregon, maybe you need to focus on Carneros in California or back to Chile. So there's all these little sub areas that are still known for their wine production, but maybe not the famous ones. But I would also note here that I would be cognizant of regions that are listed very broadly. So I see a lot of wines in the market that say California red wine. And that probably means that it's less typical of the grape variety. And the reason I usually encourage people to go for a grape variety that's fairly typical, especially in that 12 to 20 range, we're starting to see some of that typicity of a grape style, is that once you start to find wines that you like that are of that grape variety, you've now learned something about yourself. So although society talks a lot about, you know, Cabernet Sauvignon or whatever it is today, you may not like those, and that is okay. So the idea is to start to isolate some of the grape varieties you do like, and then start to find the regions that grow that variety that you like. Because once you start to gather that information, now you're a much more educated consumer and purchaser. So my first tip here with purchasing is looking for spending a few more dollars, so 12 to 20 bucks. You can certainly stick around $12 to $15. There's nothing wrong with that. So spend a few more dollars. And then looking for grapes that come from regions that maybe aren't the most famous regions, but they are known for growing that grape well. Last night, I think I had a Pinot Noir from New Zealand. Not exactly the grape you would think of from New Zealand, but there's certainly some wonderful ones, and they don't cost as much. So look for those little sub-regions. The other thing I would say here is be cognizant of marketing. I'm seeing a lot of this right now, and certainly if you've found clubs or whatever else that you love, stick with that. And I'm certainly not in a place to tell you which ones are great and which ones are not, but there's a lot of really good marketers out there. And this goes back to my point about Napa. People love Napa. Napa certainly has a place in the market. But if you're looking for a good wine, be cognizant of what those marketing messages are. Are they actually selling me something that is low sugar? And is that something I need? Is that something that doesn't otherwise exist in the market? Or is this something that is actually very unique and special, and that's something that I should spend extra money on? So just be cognizant that there are a lot of marketing messages out there, and don't get too sucked in, otherwise you might spend more than you actually need to. The other things I want to note here is nothing to do with how to purchase wine or what you need to get, but you may actually be getting wines that are much better than you think they are, but you're not treating them the way they need to be treated in order to get the best experience. And the most important point here is wines need to be chilled, all of them, red and white. And that goes against what a lot of people say. And I have even had restaurant staff look at me and say, red wine is not supposed to be chilled, but it is. So here's the rule of thumb is red wines should be between 57 and 67 degrees. So cooler than room temperature. Maybe here in the winter where our houses are fairly cool, maybe that's not so much a problem. But I would make sure that you're putting your wine, even a red wine, in the refrigerator for a few minutes before you pull it out. That allows for the slow evolution of the alcohol and the acidity as they evaporate. So if we have our wine too warm, a red wine especially, a lot of those volatile compounds will start to waft off very quickly, and it'll make the wine feel very flat and less interesting. So we don't want that. So something so simple as putting your red wine in the fridge for 10 or 15 minutes before you pour it can make a huge difference. Same is true with white wines, but on the other end of the spectrum. We often pour them far too cold. So they shouldn't be refrigerator temp. They should actually be more like 50 degrees. So put them in the refrigerator if you wish, but bring them out in time to kind of let them come to temp a little bit. If they are too cold, this is a great little tip for those who like to drink wines that are $5. If they're too cold, you miss a lot of these kind of less pleasant aromas. I love the campaign, is it Coors, like Cold as the Rockies, and like it turns blue if you stick it in an ice can or something. And that's great. But for those of you who like something that's a little more complex, you certainly don't want to pour your wine too cold. Otherwise, you're going to miss all of those smells. The volatile chemicals are now kept in kind of a confined condition so that you're missing them as they start to evolve and come out of the glass. They just will not move as quickly. So you want it to be just a little bit warmer so that you can get the best experience. The next thing I want to note here, and this is maybe something I shouldn't have to say and maybe sounds a little too simple, stay hydrated. I get a lot of questions about like, why do I get a headache, or why do I feel more hungover when I drink red wine? And most of that is you didn't drink enough water. So red wines do have a drying compound called tannin. It will dry you out. It can give you a headache, but if you start with some hydration and you have a glass of water in between glasses of wine, you'll do much better. Most of the myths that are in the universe about why red wines give you a headache is mostly just related to hydration. And then the last thing I wanted to say is just take your time. Take your time. This is an experience. It's not a rush. You don't have to down glasses. This is an opportunity for us to really experience wine as it is supposed to be intended. These are art, you know, they're art in a glass. People spent a lot of time figuring out exactly how they wanted it to taste. So I feel like it is a great opportunity for us to experience them as they were intended. All right, I want to answer some questions because I'm sure there are some.
Serena,
More commentary than anything. Yeah.
Right. I love commentary. I love commentary. Intentional eating. Yes, that's exactly what we're doing. Intentional sipping. I like to say sipping.
yeah.
That's exactly what it is. Yeah, I love it. I love it. Are there any questions? Oh, an ice cube. I love that. I have had people come into our school. What am I drinking? I'm also the wine educator at Drexel. But at What Am I Drinking, I have had people come in and ask to pour water in their wine. And certainly I feel like as a coach, it is my job to practice some non-judgment. If that's how you like it, it's how you like it. But the easiest way to chill your wine down is actually stick it in the fridge or the freezer. Just don't forget about it. Any questions for me?
I do have the, oh, I'm sorry. I cut.
Don't all chime in at once.
Go ahead, Stacey.
I do have the question of like, you see in the chat that I said, like, I never really have done research to know what wine comes from where. I mean, I probably know a little bit just from listening, but do you have like a website or something you recommend that has like good information for looking that up or?
Yeah, so there are a handful, and I have put a few articles on What Am I Drinking about that. I think the easiest thing to think of is, are there grapes coming out of that region that I've now seen several Pinot Noirs coming out of New Zealand. Is it cold or is it warm? And then that's another way to approach it. So we know Australia is mostly warm. I can think of grapes that I would want to be a little bit riper. But there's a lot that goes into that. So I would say stick with what you know now first, or a grape variety that you know you like, and then see if you can find a little bit about if you hop onto wine.com, I know I love Pinot Noir, and I can see who's making Pinot Noir, and maybe avoid the ones that are $50. You might start to isolate some that are good options for you. And as I said, try to avoid the ones that are just broad, like California or Australia, and try and find things that are like, instead of New Zealand, it says Marlborough, or instead of California, it says, Carneros. So the smaller you get, the more typical of that grape we tend to find. I mean, that's not always true, but it is fairly typical that the smaller we get, and even all the way down to like what vineyard it was grown at, that's going to indicate to you that it's taken a little bit more of an intentional path than if it were broad, all of California, all of Oregon, all of whatever. Does that make sense? So there's a lot of resources out there. I wish that I could boil all of that down into one article, but I would say if you know you like a certain variety, stick with that and then start to explore a little bit. And you can always tap me, email me. Anybody can.
Very helpful.
Yeah, I'm here. Any others?
Serena, I have to tell you, just when you were talking about like the sweet spot being in that like $12 to $20 price point, my dad has always been like very passionate about wine, and that's something that he's always like really expressed too. You know, he likes to indulge in some of the more expensive ones too, but like when he's trying to be like budget conscious without sacrificing the taste of good wines, it's something that he's always shared. So I know he's going to be like really thrilled to hear that our wine expert that we had on the show is agreeing with
absolutely. And just in sales, we look at it that way, that, you know, this is kind of like the first premium level is at 12 to 20. And then when you pass 25, we're on the next premium level. If you're really into drinking wine, or you want to splurge, or you want to explore something really special, sure, spend a little bit more money. But if you're just drinking around the house, or you're buying a case of wine, you don't need to spend that much. I love it. Thanks, Susan. Anyone else?
Yeah, Susan, I know Allison has a question, so I don't know if you want to just unmute her for a moment. She can chime in.
Mm-hmm.
Susan's the tech person, so she.
Okay. Yeah, I was like muting. I think Allison and I are both trying to.
Oh, there I am.
And it was like.
Were we toggling back and forth?
I think so.
I think so, but you're good now. So
maybe I've imbibed too much already. Can you hear me? I do have a question.
Please ask away.
My internet is going in and out. So I have this strange question. I'm, as you can see, fair-skinned, and I
Yes.
don't like spicy foods at
Yes.
all. I can't tolerate it. But when it comes to coffee and to wine, the bolder the better. So I like reds, but I like full-bodied reds. I actually don't care for a Pinot Noir. It feels too watery for me.
Yep.
And so I just find it, and like, I forget what the other scale is. You know, when you go into the store and the Wine Spectator magazine has a scale, it's not just full bodied, but I don't like it sweet. So
Yes.
I'm just curious, why in the world am I such a like a baby when it comes to food, but I cannot get my wine and coffee bold enough to, you know, to make me happy? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. So bold can mean a couple of things. And what it sounds to me is it's more of a texture and not so much a flavor,
Yeah,
if that makes sense. So really what you're looking for is more of the sensation in the mouth versus that you're starting to
you're
trigger.
right.
Does that make sense? So really, to me,
Yeah.
that's more like a comfort food thing. And I certainly find, and I think this is pretty traditional, that as we get to winter, we want heavier foods. We want fuller foods. We want something that's a little bit more fills our belly. So it's, I think, very similar is you're creating this emotional response with your wine is you want something that's a little bit more nourishing to the soul. And so you seek something that is a little bit fuller in the mouth. So I would call that fuller bodied versus necessarily bold, because bold can imply like, I can smell those, like if I have my glass, I can smell those aromas from back here. But what I think you're seeking is something that's just a little richer in texture.
That
Yeah.
makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. That
Thank
would make
you.
total sense. That has nothing to do with spicy, right? So
Yeah.
that makes total sense to me. I love that.
Thank you.
Great question.
Cool. Thanks.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Anyone else?
Yeah, we do have a question from Dan, and he's asking about the chairman
Chairman
select,
select.
which,
Yeah.
so like, I would love an honest opinion on that.
So I do a whole class on this actually. So I do a class about shopping, and when we get back to our normal status quo, I would be delighted to have you in that class. But the easiest way to explain this is that so Pennsylvania, because we are one of the full control states, we are one of the largest purchasers of wine in the country because the government is buying all of the wine for the entire state. So all restaurants are buying the wine from the government, from the chairman's board, and then all the restaurant or all the grocery stores that are now allowed to sell wine, they're buying from the PLCBs. So they actually go into the store and they buy their wine, or they order through the special order system. So that being said, they have a lot of purchase power. So they can purchase some varieties. And I always make a point in my shopping class to buy a bottle of wine from the Chairman Select, and then a bottle of wine from the same region, same variety at the price point they claim that it should be. So if I buy a Chardonnay that says, oh, it's $11 on Chairman Select, it should be 28. I'll buy a $28 bottle of Chardonnay from the same exact region, and then I pour them blind. So you don't know which one's which, and we can compare. And what tends to happen is that people decide that they still like that Chairman Select wine for the price they paid for it. So it may not beat the $28 bottle or whatever else. And I would keep in mind that there have been situations where I can't find that bottle available anywhere else in the country, which means that Pennsylvania may have purchased all of it. So if they are comparing it to, oh, it should sell at this price, but it doesn't exist anywhere else, it's kind of a tough comparison to make. Granted, the last one I used, I do see in a few places, and they do claim that that is the price that they would have sold it, $28 or whatever it was. And most of the guests said, I probably wouldn't have paid $28 for it, but I certainly like it for $11. So there are good deals available through that. And I would say lean into their purchase power. Does that mean that they are all phenomenal wines that should be selling at $50 a piece? Probably not. but they may be a really good deal for the $11. Does that answer that question okay?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really helpful. And in wine, actually.
Yeah.
Because
So
I, like everybody else, I go in the wine store and I'm like, you're just drawn. No, Dan says yes, and Angela,
yes,
you're
awesome.
like drawn to Chairman Select, like a
Yeah,
a
and
beam of
many
light. You're
people
like,
are, and
"Oh,
people will come in and they're like, well, I got this and it's on Chairman Select. I'm like, oh, that's great. That's good. I mean, it's a start. And I think what it would say is I probably got a really good deal on it. Does it still mean that it's like a phenomenal wine? I can't attest to that because it's still going to be totally varying from bottle to bottle. Awesome.
awesome."
Thanks, Diane. I appreciate you chiming in. Anyone else or anything else I can do at the moment?
I think that's it. I would love if you can share the best way for people to find you now and in the future.
Yeah,
We'll link
absolutely.
that all up to the YouTube
Perfect.
recording, but I would love for you to share just a minute on that too.
Absolutely. So the best way to find us, we're whatamitdrinking.com. We are a wine school for the everybody. So we do train professionals, but our primary focus is working with the everyday consumer who's just looking to continue their exploration of wine or learn how to be a better consumer. So whatamitdrinking.com. You can also find us on social, on Facebook, we're at whatamitdrinking.com. On Instagram, we're WHTAmIDrinking.com or Am I Drinking? So I'm happy to take any questions, comments, thoughts through those channels as well.
Awesome. And you did mention your website has a few articles that might be helpful for people
Yes,
too. So
absolutely.
Well, thank you so much. This has been
Thank
really
you.
enlightening and really awesome. Like me being pregnant, I'm like, oh, I can't
I
wait.
know. We'll bring you in eventually.
Put these in motion in a few months. Yeah.
When you're ready and need it.
Yeah. You're just preparing, Stacey.
That's right.
Yeah, exactly.
Log it all away.
Yeah. So I'm sure I speak for everybody that not only was this helpful, but it definitely gets you sort of dreaming about like, what's my next glass going to be in terms of like
Absolutely.
savoring that and taking the moment to drink it slowly. So
I love
thank you
it.
for that.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, I completely agree. I'm like, what am I gonna have with dinner tonight? And thinking through all of those wonderful things. And now I'll appreciate that glass of wine in a totally different way now. And I'm excited to do that. So thank you, Serena. Thank you for being on.
And thanks for having me.
Of course. So we always love to end our show with the Mary Oliver quote, what will you do with your one wild and precious life? And we will be off for the weekend, but we'll be back live 5 p.m. Eastern time on Monday. So thank you so much for joining us and for watching, and we'll see you soon.
Have a good night, everybody.